The journey to Red Brick Manor felt like a dive into an unsettling dream. My headlights cut through the thick fog, barely revealing the gnarled trees that loomed over the lonely road. An hour later, Siri announced our arrival. The manor loomed atop a hill, surrounded by other equally eerie structures. The neighborhood, built in the 18th century, came out like a gothic nightmare. As a debt-ridden college student desperate for cash, I was accustomed to strange and affluent environments. I parked my battered Honda A-block outside the Cooper estate. The Coopers were old money and required my assistance babysitting their 10-year-old daughter tonight. Her nanny had an emergency, Mrs. Cooper had said on the phone. The gig paid triple my usual rate, so I didn't hesitate when Mrs. Cooper mentioned that Bridget loved her dolls and they shouldn't be parted from her. The iron gate with its snarling griffin was the first sign that this place differed. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dried roses. A pale, rail-thin woman greeted me on the porch.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Cooper.
Her smile was tight.
Bridget's upstairs, in the living room.
She continued, her gaze avoiding mine.
I've left the schedule and instructions on the table. She gets upset easily.
The chauffeur gave me a particular look over Mrs. Cooper's shoulder. The nursery was at the end of a dimly lit hallway. Bridget, a delicate girl with wide, haunted eyes, sat on the floor clutching a porcelain doll.
Hi, Bridget. I'm Ale.
I said with a shaky smile. Silence. The hours afterward dragged into an eerie quiet. I tried everything to break the monotony, reading stories, building a pillow fort, but Bridget remained statue still, except for the odd rocking. Around 10, Bridget finally spoke.
I'm sleepy.
All right. Let's take you to your room.
The moment I stepped into Bridget's room, I was stunned. I'd never seen so many dolls stacked in a kid's room. They all had porcelain faces and shiny hair. The doll's hair looked strikingly realistic.
Wow. You sure love dolls, huh?
Yeah, they are my slaves.
I wasn't expecting a little girl to use a word like that, but I realized something was very wrong with Bridget. Maybe she's not getting the right kind of upbringing from her parents and turned into a spoiled brat. But I'm only here for a night, so who cares? As I tucked her into bed, my eyes went to her tiny hands. They looked rough and calloused. She blinked at me, flashing her creepy smile, and then went to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I passed out on the couch while watching a movie when I heard a glass break. A rustling wind from the open window had knocked down the vase from the pedestal. I rubbed my eyes to get a good look when noticed Bridget standing behind me. Her wrinkled face was contorted into a grotesque mask of rage as she continued stroking her doll.
I like your eyes. I'd have them.
Before I could react, she lunged at me. I stumbled backward and we both landed on the floor.
Get off me! Get off me!
I want your eyes!
I tried my best to free myself from her grasp, but damn, she was so strong. Too strong to be a child. She ripped a thick bunch of hair from my skull and smelt it while laughing like a maniac. I pushed her with all my strength and ran down the corridor. I looked over my shoulder and saw her standing at the end of the passage. Her childlike face changed into sheer evil. Adrenaline surged as I countered Bridget's attack by throwing a showpiece I found on a nearby tabletop. She tried to dodge, but the corner of it hit her on the forehead, making her scream in pain. Bridget turned to me, her eyes cold and calculating, and I bolted as fast as I could until I reached the main road. Flagging down a passing car, I breathlessly explained what had happened. The driver helped me get to the nearby police station. When I went back to the manor, I was accompanied by a squad of cops. A scary revelation surfaced once the cops searched the property. It turned out that Bridget wasn't a little girl, but a dwarf woman who was Mrs. Cooper's deformed sister. Driven by deep-seated insecurity and a history of being bullied, Bridget had killed the previous babysitters in their sleep, cutting their hair to add to her grotesque doll collection. The dolls, with their eerie resemblance to real people, were seized, and in the backyard they discovered a shallow grave containing 7 bodies of women similar to my age. Mrs. Cooper, ever the loving sister, had been burying the bodies in the backyard to cover up Bridget's atrocities. The sisters were charged with multiple counts of murder, and the manor was sealed off. The chauffeur fled the scene, but the cops suspected he too helped these psycho sisters in their gruesome murders. Since then, I have sworn to never go babysitting, no matter how much the gig is paying me. It's been a decade since that night, but I remember every detail as if it happened yesterday. Laura seemed perfect when my parents first hired her to be the babysitter. She was friendly, well-educated, and the way she integrated into our household made it feel like she had always been a part of our lives. My little sister Lucy adored her, and even I, at 10 years old, thought she was the best babysitter we'd ever had. But as time went on, I started noticing things that didn't sit right. I walked in on her once and saw Laura collecting hair from my parents' shower drain. She explained that it was for a craft project, but it always felt off. Her extensive knowledge of poisons was another red flag. She would casually mention how certain plants could kill a person in minutes, passing it off as a quirky hobby. I started getting a bad feeling about her, but she was good at pretending around my parents. The night it all went wrong, Laura had put Lucy and me to bed and was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Our dog Max never liked her, and that night he was particularly irksome to her. I was jolted awake by his frantic squeals. Instinctively, I grabbed my sling and crept downstairs. What I saw in the backyard froze my blood. Laura was drowning Max in the pool. Without thinking, I loaded a small rock into my sling and shot at her. It hit her in the head, and she turned to look at me with pure hatred in her eyes.
You little shit. You are a dead boy.
She dropped Max, who slipped away, whimpering, and she came after me. I bolted inside, and she grabbed a kitchen knife as she started chasing me. I bolted, my heart pounding in my ears. The house was dark, and I stumbled through the rooms, desperately trying to stay ahead of her. She held onto my legs just as I had started running up the stairs, but I kicked at her face, making her slip.
Ah!
She screamed in fury and swung her knife, barely missing me. I managed to make it to my room, slamming the door shut behind me. I hugged my little sister, who grew scared as Laura pounded on the door, screaming,
I'll kill you both! Just like I took care of the Hemingway kid. Make it look accidental.
Lucy huddled in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. We didn't have a phone in our room, and I knew I had to come up with something fast. Then, I saw my toy drone on the shelf, and an idea sparked. Lucy, give me that crayon and paper. I scribbled a desperate message. Help, babysitter trying to kill us. I taped the note to my toy drone and flew it out the window, hoping it would reach Mr. Wilson's house next door. I guided the drone through his kitchen window, crashing it on his table. We could hear Laura stabbing at the door, the wood splintering under the force. But a few minutes later, all of us jolted at the sound of the doorbell. Laura went silent. Moments later, I heard Mr. Wilson's voice downstairs, trying to engage with Laura. You must be the babysitter for Frank's kids. Is everything all right? I thought I heard something. I cracked the door open and peered down the stairs. Laura was standing at the door, hiding the knife behind her. Mr. Wilson stood at the door, looking concerned but ready to help. He must have sensed the urgency in my message.
Everything's fine. Just playing with the kids.
But Mr. Wilson wasn't buying it. He stepped inside, and as he did, Laura lunged at him. I watched in horror as she stabbed him repeatedly, his blood pooling on the floor and spraying everywhere. Just then, the police burst through the door, guns drawn. Laura turned to face them, but they were too quick. Bang, bang, bang. They took her down before she could reach them. I ran down the stairs, my heart still racing. The police officers were already calling for an ambulance, trying to save Mr. Wilson, but it was too late. He was already gone. The days that followed were a blur. The police took statements, and the news was filled with stories about Laura. It turned out she had a history of mental illness and a fascination with poisons and death. The Hemingway kid she mentioned was real, another family who had lost a child under suspicious circumstances while Laura was their babysitter. My parents were devastated. They couldn't believe that they had let someone so dangerous into our home. It's been 10 years, but the memories of that night is as vivid as ever. I don't think I'll ever forget Laura. Taking the babysitter job for the Wilsons seemed like a straightforward way to earn some extra cash. Their Victorian house, with its creaky floors and old-world charm, felt like stepping into a different era. I was a college student, struggling with bills, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. Miss Wilson was kind enough to show me around the house, pointing out all the essential things. She mentioned their son Timmy's unusual habit of talking to an old toy phone every night, which she chalked up to his imaginative mind. When Mrs. Wilson left, Timmy and I spent the evening playing games and watching TV. He was an easy kid to get along with, and by 9 p.m. I tucked him into bed. That's when things started to get strange. I heard Timmy's voice through the crack of his bedroom door. Curious, I crept closer and listened.
Yes, Mr. Midnight, I promise I'll be good. I won't tell her.
His voice was serious, far too serious for a child talking to a toy phone. My skin prickled with unease.
No, Mr. Midnight, she's nice. Don't hurt her.
My heart skipped a beat. Who was he talking to? I pushed the door open gently and walked in.
Hey, Timmy. Who are you talking to?
He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear.
Mr. Midnight doesn't like eavesdroppers, Sarah. You shouldn't listen.
I picked up the toy phone, but there was nothing, just plastic silence.
Hello, Mrs. Midnight. Please tell Timmy to be a good boy and go to sleep.
I joked and left, but Timmy's warning stayed with me. That night, after he'd fallen asleep, the house phone rang. I picked it up, but there was only static and faint whispers. It felt like someone was there, just beyond the static.
Hello? Who is this?
No answer, just static. I hung up, feeling a growing sense of unease, but then the calls started coming every few minutes. Every time I answered, there were whispers and static. Frustrated, I unplugged it finally, picked up a book, and sat in the living room. Suddenly, I heard footsteps upstairs. I went to check on Timmy, but he was fast asleep. It didn't make any sense. Then, I heard someone moving down the hall, closer and closer. I followed the footsteps into the kitchen when I saw a shadowy figure dart out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly in shock, but there was nothing there. I shook it off, blaming my imagination, but the sense of being watched never left. So, I sat down to watch the TV, trying to take my mind off it. But very soon, it flickered, and the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. That is when I saw a shadow moving across the wall, stopping at the doorway. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it wasn't a trick of the light. The shadow seemed to pulse, like it was alive, and then it slowly disappeared.
This isn't real. It can't be real.
My heart pounded as I tried to rationalize what I had seen, and that is when the phone rang again. Impossible. I had clearly unplugged it. My hands trembled as I walked over and picked up the receiver, hearing the familiar static and whispers.
Who is this? What do you want?
This time, a voice broke through the static, barely audible but unmistakably menacing. Run! I dropped the phone, my heart racing. I rushed up to Timmy's room, grabbed him, and headed for the door. But a dark figure blocked our way. It was tall and menacing, its presence suffocating.
Stay behind me, Timmy.
I grabbed a nearby lamp and threw it at the figure, but it went right through. The figure laughed, a low guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. Desperate, I saw the toy phone in Timmy's hand, and I don't know what got into me. I grabbed it and smashed it against the floor. The figure screamed and then just vanished, the house finally falling silent. When the Wilsons returned, they found Timmy and me shaken but safe. Mr. Wilson told that the previous owners of the place were murdered by a psychopath many years ago, a serial killer who left toy phones as his marker. He immediately called the facility where the serial killer was being held and learned that he died on the night of the Thanksgiving about a month ago. Mrs. Wilson suddenly walked in, holding the toy phone in her hand.
I thought you said you destroyed Timmy's phone. I did. Where did you find it? It was in his room.
That is when Timmy started waving at something which we couldn't see. Mr. Wilson grabbed us all and we ran out of the house. He called 911, but I didn't wait to see and ran for my home.